Hi Year 12, it's Mrs. Gill here and I'm going to be taking your next 5 history lessons. We are actually going to start a brand new topic and I'm really excited to teach you. We're going to be looking at women's civil rights in America and we're going to start by just making sure we understand what was life like for women in 1865. So first I'd like you to get yourself ready for the lesson, and you're going to need, first of all, the resources for this lesson, which were put on Show My Homework. You're going to need a pen. You're also going to need some paper to write down your answers to different tasks. And I'd also like you to put away or turn off any distractions. Pause now and get yourself ready. And when you're ready, press play. Last time, we had a lesson on progress in African American civil rights by 1992. So your Do Now task is all about that. You have 5 quiz questions to answer, and I'd like you to pause the video and try to answer them from memory without your notes. Remember, this is one of the best ways we can improve our memories. So pause now, write your answers down on your piece of paper, and when you're finished, press play. Well done, and here are the answers. I'd like you to pause the video and mark your own work. If you got any wrong, I'd like you to write the answers down, perhaps in a different colour pen. Give yourself a score out of 5 just to show how many you got correct. For this new unit, we've got something new. It's called a knowledge organiser. As you can see, it states all the events, themes, vocabulary and people that you will be learning about in this new unit. This was attached to Show My Homework, so you should have a copy of this. So we're just going to quickly go through what aspects of this knowledge organiser we're going to focus on in today's lesson. So first of all, we're going to do theme number 1. We're going to look at what life for women was like before and after the Civil War. And we're really going to just focus on one event, and that is the Civil War itself that happened in 1861 to 1865. And we're going to focus on the role that women played in supporting both armies during the war. You can pause the video very quickly if you'd like to quickly update or highlight your own version of the knowledge organiser. Press play when you're ready. So today's lesson, as you can see, our title is What Was Life Like for Women in 1865? And we've got 3 key aims for today's lesson. The first is we're going to try and understand the expected role women had before the Civil War. We're going to try and explain the impact the Civil War had on the position of women. And then at the end of the lesson, we are going to analyse what inequality women still faced even after the Civil War. Now it's time for your starter. What I'd love you to do is to look at the illustration that is on the screen from the 19th century. And there's 2 questions I'd like you to think about and write down your ideas. First of all, what is the woman doing? And then, what can you infer from the illustration about the expectations of women in 19th century America? Press pause and write down your ideas, and then when you're ready, press play again. So let's have a look at some good answers for the starter task. So first of all, I asked you to describe what the woman is doing, and you may have something like this written down. She is sat in her respectable home. She is holding a baby, and she's also looking quite adoringly, if you look at her face, at 2 other children that are probably hers. You can see that she is surrounded by quite luxurious kind of environment, that there are kind of toys around, And there's also, you might have spotted this, 2 dogs as pets as well. Now you can infer quite a lot from this image about what was expected from women in 19th century America. But again, you may have written something similar to this down. It kind of implies that women were expected to be mothers or carers for those in their family, and that they were responsible for creating a clean, comfortable, safe home for their family. And that kind of was seen as their purpose in life. So you can press pause now and write down anything that you missed, and then when you're ready, press play. Let's start with some new knowledge. We're going to look at women before the Civil War. Now you might be thinking, why are we looking before the Civil War? Our focus is meant to be 1865, and that's true. But for context reasons, it's really important for us to know what was expected of women before the Civil War to help us understand whether there was change to women's lives brought along by the Civil War. So as we gathered from the starter task, a woman's role in America was believed to be in the home, and that was quite usual for 19th century. Now the area that women apparently dominated was known as the sphere of the home. And you may have come across that if you've studied sociology or any kind of social science or social subject. Now, in the sphere of the home, women were actually respected and admired. So it wasn't seen as an unskilled role or even seen as being submissive, a submissive role. It was really highly respected. And that might explain why, despite having more educational opportunities, many young women, especially middle class and upper class women, still aspired to marriage. They still wanted to marry, and they saw this as their ultimate goal. And often their education was very centered on preparing them to be good wives and good mothers. Now, there were some drawbacks to marriage. One of which is that married women in the 19th century were expected to give up their jobs. So if they had worked as an unmarried woman, the moment they married, they were expected to give that up and focus purely on looking after their husbands, the home, and then any children that came along. There was also some inequality within marriage because quite a lot of laws ensured that women had less rights than their husband. So an example of this is that if a woman had property before her marriage, that property became her husband's. And so if the marriage broke down, that often left that woman without that wealth or that property. And the same happened with children. Children were seen as being associated more in the law with the husband and not the wife. Again, if the marriage broke down and the woman wanted to leave the husband, she may be giving up her rights to see her own children. So there was some inequality in law between husbands and wives. At this time in the 19th century, there was also limited birth control and limited access to contraception. So that meant that women tended to have quite large families, especially if they came from very religious backgrounds, like Catholic backgrounds, because marriage was seen as being meant for procreation of children. A key right that you need to know about that women did not have was that women did not have the right to vote in the 19th century. And also in America, they couldn't represent their states in Congress. So women had very little political rights compared to white men. But women, despite not having a political voice, they did become more involved in public life, and in particular when it came to social issues. And the reason for that is women had traditionally played a role in church organisations, in education, and in charities. And so lots of women dedicated their time to helping others by getting involved in charitable work that helped the poor, the uneducated, or any other social issues that they thought society had. Let's now look at the role women played during the Civil War. Now, the Civil War happened between 1861 and 1865, and it occurred between the Union states, so the states that wanted to be part of America, run by the president, and the southern states who called themselves the Confederate States, who wanted independence. Now, you might be surprised to know that there were some women who took part in the fighting. We have about 400 documented instances of women disguising themselves as men and joining the army. And again, I can show you an example here of a young woman in her feminine clothes and then in her disguise. As amazing as that sounds, you've got to remember that 400 is a lot less than the amount of women who lived during the Civil War. But again, it shows there were some women who were daring enough to disguise themselves and fight. For a majority of women, as men went off to fight for both armies, women took charge of the household. So they took charge of their homes, their families, and sometimes even some land and perhaps even a business. The war actually brought an increase in work opportunities for women. So many women got involved in agricultural work, such as farming and plantation work, and others worked in some factories. And I've got an example here of some women working in a factory, again to help the war effort. Other women got involved by becoming nurses and tending the wounded. Again, this was more of an example of women extending their domestic tasks and getting involved in charitable actions. So it didn't necessarily become a new profession for many women. It was just seen as something they felt like they could do to help the war effort. Now, the Civil War became what we know as a total war, meaning it kind of really changed lots of people's lives. And one way it did this was that the Union forces marched through the South, destroying crops and plantations. Now, they did this in order to have an impact on the Southern economy. But what it actually did is it left lots of women taking the brunt. They were the ones who lost their crops or lost their income in their plantations. So lots of women were badly affected by this. Now, as women were getting so involved in the war effort and in the home front, the idea that women were unfit for anything except kind of gentle domestic activity was kind of seeming to be out of fashion. In other words, it was at odds with the reality of war. And this really encouraged some women they thought that they could gain more freedoms, perhaps even more rights after the war. you are now ready to do a task. The first thing I would love you to do is, as you can see on my screen, I have created a table. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to copy that table down. You can either do it on your computer, or you can obviously do it by hand. Now I'd like you to use the previous slides and the information sheet, and particularly that first page of the information sheet, to complete two of the columns of the table, the before and during columns. Okay, so in other words, before the war and after and during the war. And in particular, you're writing down any information you have about the role women played, the education and employment they had, the rights they had, and the attitudes towards women. Because that's what we're really kind of interested in. I want you to leave the after column for now. I don't want you to fill that in yet. You will be filling it out, but not straight away. So press pause and complete the tasks, and then when you're ready, press play and we'll carry on. You should now have a semi-completed table. So we're now going to quickly talk about some of the impact the Civil War had. Now, the war brought economic and social change, as well as a lot of disruption, not just to women, but to lots of different groups in American society. But in particular, if we focus on women, it gave hope that women would be rewarded for their part in the war and they would gain political rights. Now, this is because obviously there was a lot of talk after the Civil War that African Americans would gain political rights. And so many women thought that perhaps they would as well. The other thing we need to remember is that many women, when the war ended, did not want to return to that pre-war domesticity. In other words, they didn't really want to return to just being a mother or a housewife. And they actually tried to build on their wartime experience of being more involved in public life, so contributing more to their society and to their community. Now, what I would like you to do now is this. I want you to read that second page of the information sheet, because that goes into a lot more detail about the impact of the war and the kind of what life was like after the war for women. You are then going to use that information to complete the after column. And again, you need to focus on the role women were playing after the Civil War, the education and employment they had, the rights women had, and the attitudes towards women. So press pause and complete those tasks, and then when you're ready, press play. So let's have a look at some of the information you may have recorded in that after the Civil War column. So we're going to focus first of all on the role women played and how the war might have changed that. So first of all, you might have written down that it was still believed that a woman's place was inside the home. Unfortunately, that had not changed as a result of the Civil War, despite everything that women had done. Women still had heavy childcare responsibilities, even when they were working alongside men. So in other words, women were still seen as the ones to look after children. So if they did work, they were expected to work and take responsibility of children. So kind of balance those two things. Education and employment. Married women were barred from working outside the home after the Civil War by the policies of employers or by state legislation, so state laws. So again, lots of women, married women in particular, found that any freedom they gained and any employment opportunities they gained were stripped away from them. And again, that's because people believe that married women should go back inside the home. However, married working class women who often were quite poor and their families were quite poor, it was seen as okay for them to take in kind of any activities that would help them make money, such as laundry, mending clothes, or even having lodgers, people that stayed with them and paid rent. Working class women were often only able to get kind of lower paid or casual employment. And in particular, they still continue to work in kind of what we call domestic service, so working as kind of cooks or maids. And again, that's because a lot of men returned from the war and needed work, so they were given most of the work. Again, some of the work that working class women had, or single women had, was unskilled and poorly rewarded manufacturing jobs. And there were few opportunities in professional work outside of the two kind of key female professions, which was teaching and nursing. So what rights did women have? So they still didn't have any political rights, and that's because they did not have support from men to gain the vote. So unfortunately, if any women had hoped to gain the vote after the Civil War, that just did not happen. And again, some men just didn't think women should be involved in politics. They continued to suffer from limited birth control, and there was still limited use of contraception. So again, women were still mainly having quite large families, still expected to have lots of children. So attitudes towards women, it was still believed that women's place was inside the home. In other words, attitudes had not really necessarily changed from kind of pre-war attitudes, and especially when it came to married women, they were still very much expected to just go back to their roles as mothers, caregivers, wives. So check your answers against this. If it's similar, brilliant. If there's something you've missed out, you can pause the video quickly and add it in. Right, so we've learned quite a lot about the lives of women before, during and after the Civil War. What I'd like you to do next is this. There are 4 different statements about women and the American Civil War. So there's the American Civil War improved employment opportunities for women. The American Civil War changed attitudes towards women. Women still suffered from considerable inequality in 1865. And by 1865, there was a strong possibility that women would play a greater role in US public life. So as you can see, very different statements. What I would like you to do, and it's your final task, is this. I want you to read those statements, and then I want you to state on your piece of paper how far you agree with each one. So how far you agree with each statement, and then to support your decision using specific details and knowledge from today's lesson. So if you agree strongly with the statements, you need to back that up with details and knowledge. And if you strongly disagree with the statements, you need to kind of argue why it is correct or incorrect based on your knowledge from today's lesson. So I'd like you to pause the video and complete this task, and when you're finished, press play. Right, Year 12, that is the end of our lesson today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There will be some more lessons coming your way, but well done for today.